Okay, we're up on Facebook now.
A very warm welcome to viewers joining us on Facebook, and apologies for us being a wee little bit late this evening in bringing our next interview to you in the series In Conversation with Healers, Jennifer Jones. Unfortunately, the technological gremlins have been with us this evening, and even though the Zoom room was open half an hour early, we then had a broadband issue that took everything out. So I do apologise for the slight delay. Without further ado, let's get on with the interview. This month's interview is with Jennifer Jones, who is tutor and chair of the Healing Trust. Jennifer had already recognised her spiritual side growing up with some, quote, interesting, close quote, relations. But it was when she was told 30 years ago that she had 3 days to live that this was brought into sharper focus. When she survived that experience, she felt inspired to move more earnestly on her spiritual path. Training with several different organisations, she has been healing since then. Jennifer has been teaching for around 25 years, including sound healing, in which she is also qualified. She is also a jazz singer and lives on Dartmoor with 2 Labradors. Jennifer, an absolutely fascinating story. Now, in the first instance, do tell us about your interesting relations.
My interesting relations.
We all want to know.
Okay, so I was born to 2 parents, bizarrely, and my mother was a doctor. Indeed, she still is. She's still alive, but she's 97 now. And my father was a teacher, and they were quite normal, relatively speaking. However, their relations, my mother's relations in particular, and actually my father's relations as well, were a bit different. So, for example, my grandmother, my mother's mother, used to read palms and do tea leaves. My mother's father's mother used to hold a séance in their house in Suffolk every Tuesday, and my mother, as a child, would go to séances once a week.
Wow.
I couldn't believe that when she told me. She was 7 or whatever. So in my mother's side of the family, not only was there the grandmother who held the séance, there were all sorts of mediums, healers, astrologers, and all sorts of people within the family. So, and then there was my mother's mother, who was also that way inclined. And on my father's side, I think my grandmother, who I couldn't stand, and she couldn't stand me either, I think she was probably that way inclined as well. So there was some, in the background of this sort of, quote, normal family, my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, and myself, I'm the baby of the family, we were quite normal, or so we thought, until things started happening to me. So, it's definitely in the family. My nieces and nephews, well, some of them, have all experienced various things. And yes, you mentioned that I was in hospital it was 32 years ago now, nearly. Mm-hmm. Where I was in hospital and very, very seriously ill. And I was admitted to hospital, being taken in by an ambulance in huge pain. The following day I felt okay. I felt as if I'd been kicked in the stomach, but I felt okay and I wanted to go home. And so I had to wait until the consultant came to talk to me, because the nurses wouldn't let me go until I'd spoken to the consultant. So this consultant came eventually, quite late in the afternoon, by which time I was really cross because I wanted to go home. And I said, I want to go home. I'm perfectly okay. Please let me go home. And he said, what you have kills people. I'm not letting you go.
Oh, my goodness.
So I went, oh, okay. And it makes me very emotional when I think about it, actually. But he was fantastic. What a wonderful man. So I sat in my little bed in the hospital. He went away, and I sat there in my hospital bed holding on to the sheets, going, okay, what's this about? Why am I here? What is this about?
Wow.
And then I met an amazing nurse who was a medium. The nurse in my ward was a medium, and she came and talked to me. And there we are. That's the beginning of everything. I just want to wipe my eyes away.
So that was your first experience of healing?
I don't know. I did see that question that you posted. When did I first experience healing? I don't know. Quite possibly when I was younger, but I don't actually know when I first had healing, if I'm honest.
Okay. Before you started working in healing, you've got a very fascinating background in theatre and museums, haven't you?
Yep.
Tell us a bit about that.
Okay, so yes, I had a passion for theatre from the time, probably in my mid-teens, actually. I used to go to the theatre a lot. Earlier than that, perhaps. I was a member of the Young Vic, and I used to go and see everything the Young Vic did. And sometimes, about 8 times, I'd go to the Young Vic to see what they were doing. I used to go to the theatre a lot. And then I went and did a degree in a subject that I found hugely, hugely boring. And when I left, I trained as administrator. No, what was it called? I was doing something called arts administration. There were not very many courses like that in those days. In fact, it was the only one that was available at the City University. So I went and did a postgraduate diploma in arts administration, and I started working in a theatre. And I was there in various theatres all over the place, including some really very, very, very prestigious places that I've worked. I worked in the West End. I worked with somebody called Alan Ayckbourn, if any of you have heard of Alan Ayckbourn.
Yes.
A well-known playwright, and I worked with him in Scarborough for a few years. Then a little bit later, I worked at the Globe Theatre, and then the Rose Theatre. So the Rose Theatre was a theatre that was an archaeological discovery. It was found very close to the remains of the Globe Theatre, the original Globe Theatre, very close to that. And there was a horrible, horrible building on top of it. And they knocked down the building. And now still in London, if anything gets knocked down, they have to bring in an archaeological team. And I was sitting in my office at the Globe Theatre before the Globe was built, the now Globe, that one. And I was sitting in my office, and one of the archaeologists came into my office and said, "Jennifer, we've just found the Rose Theatre." So the Rose Theatre was the first theatre on Bankside, which is the south bank of the Thames between London Bridge and Southwark, really. That's Bankside. And so I was very heavily involved in that. I then became the administrator of the Rose Theatre Trust, which I did for about 6, 7, 8 years. Can't remember. And then I was poached, and I went into museums. I went to the Museum of London, which is in the City of London, and I was their head of press and PR. So I was involved in all of that stuff and all the publicity around things that we were doing. We had some amazing stories, some fantastic archaeological digs, because the Museum of London has an archaeological whole department of archaeology. It's now called MOLA, Museum of London Archaeology. So it was all interesting, very, very interesting. And I did that for some years. Then I was moved again, and I went to the Design Museum, which is on the South Bank. I've done a lot of work along the River Thames. And then that was it. I left and I moved to Devon. and that was something like 18 years ago now. So I've been living in Devon since then.
Oh, what a lovely place to live.
Thank you.
Who has inspired you most and why?
Sometimes you meet people, especially in the arts, or sometimes in the arts, you can meet people, and no doubt you can meet people like this in other walks of life, but they can be really awful, really rude, really disparaging, and not at all nice. And one person who I really, really, really liked was Alan Ayckbourn. Or is Alan Ayckbourn. He's still alive. He's now about 83, I think he's now. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man. Really, very, very much somebody who wanted to work with a team of people. He got a strong team of people together, and he encouraged us all. It was fantastic. And we'd have lovely parties at his house.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, it was.
What sense of purpose or mission or duty guides you in your life?
Can you repeat that question? I've read it and wasn't quite sure what I might say to it, but I'll say it again and I'll...
What sense of purpose or mission or duty guides you in your life?
I can't stop. I'm not good at stopping. I've worked all my life and have no intention of stopping now. And my mother's a very, very big, it has a very big impact on my life, or has had. My mother retired at 82. She was a doctor, she was a consultant in 2 different specialities, a medical doctor. And she did not retire until she was 82. And I don't think that not stopping is necessarily a good thing, but I'm also made of similar metal, I think, that I can't imagine sitting around and just reading the newspaper.
No.
I just can't see myself doing that. So I do have a sense of what I love and I'm passionate about, and the things that I love and I'm passionate about, I want to do. But it wasn't until I spoke to my mother and said, well, I've got this thing. I won't bore you with it, but I've got this thing. And she said, yes, it kills people in 3 days.
Wow.
And but I knew at the time, I am not going to die right now. I absolutely knew. There was no question. And this is when I started, as I said in the introduction that you gave, I was very, again, driven. I just went, oh, okay, right. So immediately my mediumship came up. So immediately I knew there were all sorts of things I knew that I didn't know I knew. And then I realised I knew them and thought, oh, that's interesting. And so I went back to London. I wasn't in London at the time when I was taken ill. I went back to London. I went to the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, which used to be in Belgrave Square. And I actually called them and said, I'm looking for a mediumship development class. And they said, there's one starting tomorrow. Come along.
Wow, what timing.
I know. Most people who want to get into a mediumship development class take months to try and find one. Mine started the next day.
Wow.
So I started doing that. So all this, and then I used to go to the Arthur Findlay College all the time. I used to go 3 times a year for a week at a time. So I was there for 3 weeks a year, learning mediumship, perfecting mediumship. Well, perfecting. Is there such a thing? But certainly practicing mediumship, and healing came into that too a bit. But I wasn't healing at this point. This wasn't even, I was doing it privately, but I certainly wasn't focusing on it at that time. So I then started teaching at the Arthur Findlay College. I taught sound healing there and indeed mediumship for about 10 years, I suppose. Haven't been there recently, but I was there as a tutor. So yes, what I was going to say was that the practice of spirituality, of which there are many arms, was drummed into me very, very quickly from after I came out of hospital. I had to have an operation, and I mended pretty fast, and off I went. So yes, there were lots of principles of spirituality that I picked up. I probably knew them already. It was bizarre. There was a fantastic book or books that I was reading around this time as well. A friend of mine loved Shirley MacLaine. This friend of mine was a man who worked in the theatre too, and I worked in 2 or 3 theatres with him at different times, and he loved the works of Shirley MacLaine. And he asked me if I'd read the Shirley MacLaine books, and I said no. And this is a man who's very precious about his books. He took them off the shelf and gave them to me. Well, no.
Oh, how lovely.
And there was one particular book that I was reading at that time, just before this all happened, and it was the one where she starts getting into spirituality herself. And I spent probably 2 weeks reading this book, and 2 weeks probably crying, because the book was full of stuff I already knew.
Yeah. So it really resonated.
And nobody had ever told me those things, but I knew them.
Wow. Wow.
Anyway.
What key things do you feel you've learned from your spiritual path?
A sip of tea. What do I think? Okay. I was just going to say kindness is the most important thing I can think of. But actually, you've got to know that whatever you put out, you get back. That's one of those fundamentals. You can't be horrible to people and expect your life to go easily. So we have to be beacons of light. We now, everyday world, we have to be. Doesn't mean I don't get cross and I don't swear sometimes, because I do. But generally speaking, I try to understand everybody. I don't understand everybody, and sometimes there are some people who I find challenging. Like that. But, yeah.
What is your favourite daily spiritual practice?
Oh, goodness. Getting up in the morning. That's quite a challenge, actually, for me. I'm quite a late bird and not an early bird. So getting up in the morning is probably one of them. But then connecting and making sure there is time for connecting. But then I'm connecting a lot of the time. When I'm teaching, I am connected completely.
Yes.
I don't stop connecting. But, when I'm doing my shopping, I'm probably not connecting quite then. Although I might be, but not necessarily. But yes, connecting. And whether that means going into full meditation or whether it means just connecting, being aware.
Yeah.
Breathing.
How would you explain spiritual healing to someone who does not know anything about it? What is a spiritual healer and what do they do?
And what do they do? So I had a plumber in here the other day who came to sort out something to do with my plumbing and my heating, something or other. And we started talking about healing. And it became obvious that he was a spiritual healer. Well, he was a healer himself. He wasn't trained, he wasn't nothing about it, but he was clearly a natural healer. So when I'm talking to people about healing who know nothing about it whatsoever, I will always say that this isn't us doing this work. We are just the conduit for the work that happens. Yes. So we need to connect with our with the source, whatever word you want to use. Some people have a problem with the word God, but I often use that word, or source, or the universe, or words like that, which some of us use. A lot of people don't quite they won't understand until they've done it themselves, I suspect. Until you connect, until you feel what it feels like, you won't know what that means. Probably. Well, undoubtedly, I think. So it's about, I also have spirit guides. I'm a medium as well, although I don't use that in my healing because we don't do that in the Healing Trust. We don't talk about guides specifically. We certainly don't tell them what they say. And I'm so busy trying to be the best healer I possibly can be, that I'm always asking questions. Right, what am I doing now? What am I doing? Do I move my hand here? Shall I do this? Shall I go to the knee? And I ask questions all the time, and they tell me in now uncertain terms to shut up and get out of the way. So that is, yes, they have quite a good sense of humour. So I just go, okay, I'll just try and shut up and get on with it. So,
is spiritual healing just for physical ailments, or can it help emotional unrest too, do you think?
I think it can help absolutely everything.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely everything at all levels. So physical, mental, emotional, whatever the other ones are.
Spiritual.
Sorry?
Spiritual
as well, yes, absolutely. No question. It's just so awesome. It is just amazing. And for people who haven't experienced it, it's that they don't really understand, and they can't imagine why it would work because they don't understand it. And that's okay. They just have to experience it. I have a friend around the corner from where I live who had something going on in her neck. I don't exactly know, but she was in a lot of pain, and it was at the side of her neck. And I'd no idea what it was, but it was really causing her some challenge. cure, was it?
What place does spiritual healing have in a pandemic, in
Well,
particular with coronavirus?
Yeah, so I'm sure anybody who has coronavirus would benefit from having healing, especially if it's.
Yes.
Some people just have to die at that point. We don't know when it is our time.
Yeah.
I've had an extra 32 years, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. And
Yeah.
So,
if there are any doctors listening tonight, what would you say to them to convince them to have healers working alongside them?
So I'll tell you about a party that we had for my mother's birthday, which was, I think it was her 80th birthday, or possibly 70th. It was probably her 70th birthday, actually. We had a party for her in my brother's back garden, and we invited all her friends, which of course included a lot of other doctors, and a whole load of doctors who she had graduated with in her at the university she went to. She graduated with quite a few, something like 30 or 40 doctors, and she was very friendly with these people, and she'd meet up with them once a year or whatever it was. She was very good friends with them. And I found myself at this party for my mother, sitting at a bench in my brother's back garden, and the whole of the one of those picnic table things, you know. So there must have been about 8 of them, and me. And somebody said, I think it was a doctor I knew quite well. She was a consultant anaesthetist at a hospital in North London. And she said, Audrey tells me that you're a healer, she said. And I said, yes, I am. And I glanced around the table at 8 other consultant doctors, some of whom were retired, but some of whom were still working, and thought, gulp, how do I do this? Anyway, so how would I would tell them what I do in the same way that I would tell anybody else. Because some doctors, especially the old-fashioned ones, the ones that trained years ago, didn't seem to want to acknowledge any spiritual qualities about people, and it was all about mind and body, and not necessarily about mind, but certainly body. But then they learnt a bit more and a bit more. Some of them are really amazing now. There's actually a doctor who lives in this village where I live, and he's a consultant pediatric surgeon. And I have long conversations with him about healing, and he is so tuned in, completely tuned in, which is brilliant. So, but what was also interesting was that the woman who'd asked me the question about healing, and I knew her well. We used to go to the theatre together when I was probably a teenager, and maybe in my 20s. We used to go to the theatre with my mother and her. And this doctor, who was a wonderful woman, and she came up to me afterwards, after this conversation about being a healer, and she said, do you know, if I'd heard what you just said, and you were just anybody, I would not have believed it. Mm. But it was you that said it.
Wow. Can you quote an example of where healing is backed by scientific evidence anywhere?
Definitely. The lovely Sandy Edwards has written a book. My copy of it is up there on the bookshelf over there. Healing in Hospitals. She, amazing woman, she has, for those who don't know about healing in hospitals, Sandy Edwards wrote, or indeed set up, back in the 2008, I think it was, set up a study of patients in a hospital who were being seen in a hospital in Birmingham. They got money from the lottery to think it was 205,000. I remember writing the press release. And as I've got experience in communications, I wrote the press release. So they did all this research into people who had IBS or IBD, so irritable bowel syndrome or inflammatory bowel disease, only those people. And she did it with this doctor, a consultant at the hospital in Birmingham, University Hospital, I think, in Birmingham. Can't remember all the details off the top of my head. And it was done rigorously so that there were some people who were treated, some people who weren't treated, and they had the blind thing, whatever that's called. I can't remember the expression for that. So, and Sandy is quoted in so many scientific journals. The book that she's written, the second version, the second edition has just come out just before Christmas, I think. And it's got slightly different information in it as well as what was there before. So she is very well known in scientific circles, especially with those who really know that it works.
Yeah.
No question.
So spiritual healing and Reiki, are they the same thing or different, would you say?
Oh, who knows? Yes, of course. It's all about energy. The thing about Reiki, I did do Reiki 1 once, but I haven't done any other Reiki training, although I keep thinking I might. I do know people who are full healers with the Healing Trust and also Reiki healers. And I ask them sometimes, is it the same? And one particular person I know who is a master and has been also teaches Reiki, but is also a very good healer. I asked her way back if she felt that it was different, and she said yes.
Ah.
I think, how did she describe it? I think she said, I don't know where I'm getting this from now. I think she said it comes from a different place in her head. Now, when I'm doing mediumship, I have something in my head. It's going to sound bonkers, I know, but hey. So when I'm doing mediumship, it's like I click a little switch in my head. Who knows if there's a little switch or whatever? I have no idea. I just see a switch and I just click it, and it's not quite as obvious as that. But anyway, that's what I do. And so I felt that what she was saying was something similar. Mm-hmm. It was like I don't know, something. But the point is that it is energy. They have a different way of presenting it for Reiki people. But I have some very dear friends who are Reiki people, and there's no question that they are doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If, as the client, I believe that I'm healed, should I stop taking medicine and seeing my doctor?
You should never stop seeing your doctor unless you have been to see him, her. I did this once. I was on a particular type of medication and I knew it wasn't doing me any good whatsoever, and it was causing me pain. And I went to the doctor first. Remember, my mother's a doctor. I wouldn't stop taking medication until I'm told. And I went to the doctor and said, this is really not very nice. I don't like it. I don't want to take it anymore. And he took me off it. But I wouldn't just stop.
No.
My mother was really, really strict when we were children. If we had to go on antibiotics, there was no question of coming off. Even if you were completely better, you had to take the whole thing. So 5 days, often sometimes 7 days. Even though you feel better, you mustn't stop taking the antibiotics. That's what my mother used to say. And so I did what I was told.
As well as continuing to take your medicine and continuing to see your doctor, after receiving healing, is there anything that the client can do to assist the healing taking place?
Well, certainly the more people can relax, and maybe meditation if they're interested in that sort of thing. I wouldn't force meditation on anybody, because if you're not naturally aligned to that work, and it can take a long time to get into, for some people, I mean, for lots of people, it doesn't take any time to get into. But if you're resisting it, it's not going to work. If you're resisting being in meditation, it's not going to happen. Your mind is going to go into monkey mind and start racing around. That's not helpful. So the more somebody can relax and de-stress in whatever way that works, or however that can be achieved, preferably not with a huge amount of alcohol, but the more people can relax and just allow themselves to heal.
Yeah. Conversely, if I think I'm healthy, can spiritual healing still help me?
I think so.
In what way?
I have spiritual healing regularly, and there's not much wrong with me. It allows you to go into, it can allow you, it doesn't necessarily have to, because different people are different, but it allows you to relax in a way that you might not relax. If you're sitting watching the television, you're not necessarily relaxed. Whereas if you're having healing and you're allowing yourself to relax into that, it's hugely healing. It has an amazing impact.
People talk a lot about the power of gratitude. Do you think that gratitude has a place for people receiving spiritual healing?
I think gratitude has a place for absolutely everybody in all walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of whether they're having spiritual healing, gratitude is an amazing way of acknowledging where you are in your life, and it just we're brought up in our culture anyway to want more and more and more and more. And when you've got a house full of stuff and you realise you haven't got any more space for anything more, you start downsizing. And becoming grateful for what you have can really, really, really shift the way that we see ourselves. And just being in tune with the universe, if you want to call it that. Yes, just being in tune. We don't need all this stuff. Sometimes I watch the television and there are adverts and adverts and adverts. Buy this, buy this, buy this, buy this. And I can't imagine anything else. I don't want to buy those things. Thank you.
No.
So gratitude is good, yes.
When imagining giving contact healing, we often picture the location to be very zen, very calm, relaxing and peaceful. And certainly that's the thought in my mind when I think about giving contact healing at the sanctuary, because we're right by our rose garden and we've got a beautiful fountain with water flowing and all that sort of thing. But actually, can healing be given anywhere?
Absolutely.
So could healing be given in a pub, for example?
Yes. I do healing. I might catch, this is another one of the stories I tell my students. When I'm driving around London, which I am sometimes, not as much these days because I don't live there anymore, and you catch sight of just a human being walking along the pavement, and you can see they are struggling.
Yep.
You know they are struggling. I send them healing instantly, and then I keep driving. I can do it while I'm driving. I don't have to put myself into a rose garden, although that would be lovely. I just do it instantly.
Okay.
I don't necessarily know what outcome that might have. However, I know it will benefit them, and I trust that.
Can you tell us of a healing success and give us an example?
Oh, heavens. Yes, undoubtedly. Oh gosh, yes, I'll tell that one. Years and years ago. Now, this is when I was getting into healing, because I was training rather at the Arthur Findlay College, but working mostly in mediumship. And I met lots of mediums who said, "But you're a healer as well, not that you're not a medium." And so I remember going to visit my uncle who had a bad knee, and they lived in a 3 or 4 story house. I can't remember how many stories it had, but there were a lot of stairs. And he's a very tall man, my uncle, and he was having trouble getting up the stairs because of his bad knee. And I said, "Okay, well, I'm supposed to be a healer. I'll give you some healing. I've no idea what I'm doing, but I'll just ask." So I gave him healing on his knee, and then I went away again, and he lived in Bristol or Bath or somewhere, and I was in London at that time. And then some months later, I said, "By the way, how's your knee? I gave you some healing on your knee. How did it go?" And he said, "Oh, never had any problem with it since." And then the other person, who was also a member of my family, because I was practicing on people, because I hadn't a clue what I was doing really. I was just training and didn't know much about it. So I just asked. All the time I was asking, "What am I doing? What am I doing?" So I went to see my cousin this time. This is a cousin who was living up in Manchester area. And she was quite poorly. She had something that were called liver cysts. Now, I've no idea what a liver cyst is, except it's obviously something. I still don't really know what a liver cyst is, but anyway, she had loads of them in her liver. And every 6 months, she had to go to the hospital, stay in hospital while her liver cysts were drained. It was really painful, and she'd have the liver cysts drained, and then she'd go home.
Let me just...
Oh, you're here twice, Alison. Oh, there you are. I see you now. I can't hear you, though, because you're muted. So, liver cysts and my cousin. So, and I said, she was sitting in her kitchen, and I said, "Oh, there's me." So I said to her, "Well, apparently I'm a healer, so why don't I give you some healing?" I said to my cousin. And she had to go back, as I say, every 6 months. So she lived in Manchester, I lived in London, didn't see her very often. And then quite recently, this was probably 30 years ago or so, I don't know exactly, and I contacted her in the last couple of years and said to her, "By the way, do you remember ages ago you used to go to hospital to have your liver cysts drained? And I gave you some healing at the time when I was there with you, and I've never heard any more about your liver cysts. What happened to your liver cysts? When did you have to go back?" I said, because she had to go back every 6 months. "When did you go back?" And she said, "I never went back.
Wow.
My liver cysts were absolutely fine."
Wow.
So,
That's amazing. And it's always lovely to hear stories like that, isn't it? It really is. My next question is rather odd, having created that noise, and that noise was caused because my computer suddenly decided that it would play ball after all, and so I managed to get to the Zoom room on my laptop, and so I can now join you alongside you, Jennifer, rather than being rather remote and just putting you in the middle of everybody. So the next question is actually making me laugh because of the timing. How does sound healing work? You couldn't script this, could you? Although I did script it.
There's no such thing. Everything happens for a reason. Sound healing works in all sorts of ways. Basically, vibration. So it's using vibration to create, well, using sound to make vibration. Now, of course, if we're healers as well, which I am, then there's also the whole thing about intention and setting up somebody to be in the place where that might help. So there are all sorts of different ways of doing sound healing. So the obvious things are gongs and tuning forks and drums and singing bowls, you know, those things. I don't use any of those things. I use my voice. So I make funny sounds with my voice. And I won't do it on Zoom because it'll probably distort. But I basically do a lot of overtoning, making sounds. Do you know what overtoning is?
I don't. Tell us. Do tell us what overtoning is.
Okay, so overtoning is when you create a sound, but then you split the sound. So what starts off as one note, the overtones, every sound has an overtone, and they're in a particular pattern. It's all mathematical. So when you make one sound, you can create overtones by doing what I do to make the other sounds at the same time. It's very, very, very powerful.
Yeah. I had a gong bath at the sanctuary when I first arrived at the sanctuary, and I'd never had one before. And I was incredibly naive. And it was a gong bath that was already being held, and I thought I'll go along to this, and it was being held in the evening, and then I'll get in my car and I'll drive home. And yes, you're laughing, I know. And when the gong bath ended, I felt so relaxed.
Yes.
I thought there's no way that I can get into a car and drive just yet.
No.
I was still gonging.
Yes.
And I literally had to sit down for a good hour and a half drinking tea until I felt in a position where I would have enough concentration to do the drive home.
Yeah.
And I was just amazed at how powerful that was.
Yep, it is.
Yeah.
I have friends who do gong baths and what have you. Very, very powerful. Yes, I have worked with gongs actually a long time ago. But generally speaking, I just use my voice.
So coming on now to the Healing Trust, where you're chair and you're also a tutor. Tell us about the Healing Trust so that we can get to know a bit more about the organisation.
Okay, so the Healing Trust was founded in 1954, which makes it older than me. And you. And it was, well, a lot of people were very heavily involved with somebody called Harry Edwards, as you know. Harry was already doing lots of healing in the 30s, 40s, and whatever. And the sanctuary, as we know, the Harry Edwards Healing Sanctuary was set up in 1946. Is that right? Can't remember. Is it 46?
We celebrated our 75th last year.
46? Yeah, 46. So he was doing lots of stuff, and there were lots of other people doing healing. So there was small, as I understand it, I don't know the full history, but there were other groups of healers working in different areas. The Essex lot had Essex healers, and Surrey had Surrey healers. And there were lots of other groups around the country of people who were doing healing. And there was somebody called, I'm going to forget his name now, John, oh goodness, what's his name? John somebody, can't remember his name.
We'll go with John. John,
John, his surname was G, had a G at the beginning, I think. He had the idea to set up a federation of different spiritual groups, healing groups. So they created the National Federation of Spiritual Healers. So it was bringing people together. And Harry was involved in a little bit of a peripheral way. It wasn't his idea, but he became member number one, and he became the president as well of the NFSH. So that's when it was started, and there have been many people I haven't even heard of who've been in between then and now. And you know, fairly recently in those years, I mean, I know people who've been healing for 30 odd years who never trained. There was no training. You just went along to a healing centre and learned how to do it by watching somebody else. So there was no training for quite some time, well, for a very long time. And then they brought in training, etc., etc. So the Healing Trust has been going for 68 years this year. And it's still going. And here we are.
Wonderful.
What was the second part of the question? Was there a
No, you've answered the question.
Oh, I have,
You've answered
okay.
the question.
Yeah.
So thinking about becoming a healer, can
Yeah.
anybody become a healer?
Only if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the answer I always give. People say, but could I be a healer? Well, it depends on whether you want to. If you don't want to, don't bother. But if you're drawn to doing it, you will. And you will learn, and it's not difficult.
No.
I think everybody has the ability, because I think it's one of those God-given things, but you need to be called to do it.
Mm.
If you don't want to do it, you won't. You'll go and watch trains or football matches or whatever, you know. We all have our own interests in life, and if this is an interest, then by all means follow it, but if it isn't, go and find something else.
Why is meditation important for healers?
We need to get out of our normal lives, our mundane lives. When I say mundane, I mean it in the original usage of the word mundane, earthly. So mundane, that word, it doesn't mean it's just boring. It's linked to the earth. So when we are in our daily lives, where we're going shopping and shall I have tuna or steak tonight or whatever it has to be, we're just getting on and doing things normally because lots of us do. It's only when we allow ourselves to move into a different realm where we can find out more about what life is about. And if you're lucky enough to have lovely people, and you will, everybody does have people who will work with you if you're interested in doing that, you can get so much guidance from people about, you just see your life in a different way from the normal mundane things that most people do, because they're not aware of anything else. And that's okay, you know, it's not their time to learn that stuff, it's okay. But there we are.
How important is it for healers to protect, cleanse and support their auras? And if it is important, how would you go about doing this?
I don't think I ever protect my aura. No, I do actually. Yes, I do. Oh gosh. I think if you are the sort of person who we are all empathic beings. If we're healers, we're empathic beings. There's probably no question about that. Some are super, super sensitive, and some are more down to earth, and therefore perhaps find it easier to make sure they're protected. I do protection, obviously, and I do check in with myself. But I've been doing it for so long that I don't do it terribly consciously. I do it, but it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
It's just a thought.
Okay. If somebody's passed their healing panel, what advice would you give for how they can become even better healers?
Practice, 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 practice.
Yeah.
Practice. You have to get. You have to find out how it works. I mean, obviously you're learning about it when you're training, but until you've had a lot of practice, because everybody's different. All healers are different. Some feel things, some don't feel things, some don't have any idea what's going on. They're just doing it, and amazing stuff happens. So we all work in a different way. Some people see colours, some people hear things, some people don't. You just need to do more to find out. So, okay, it's almost like you have to learn to trust it. And the more you do, the more you learn to trust it, I would say.
Lovely. Do you have any tips on how healers can strengthen their attunement still further?
Well, meditation, actually. Meditation is, or actually, well, I sat in loads of circles, actually. I sat in loads of circles regularly. Mostly mediumship ones, actually, but that was because I was interested in that side of things. But healing circles exist as well, and if there isn't one, start one.
Yeah.
That's if there's a healing circle you don't know, then just start another one. Find people and find your tribe. You'll need to be part of a tribe.
Absolutely. Turning to distant healing, when you're sending distant healing to somebody, are there certain phrases that are more helpful to use than others? For example, if you're sending healing to someone with cancer, is there anything specifically you would be asking for?
No. I just want to get out of the way. I have to get out of the way. If I think too much, I'm not out of the way. So I'm working with somebody with cancer now. I just do it several times a day whenever I think. But I'm not using any particular words, just sending him love and light and all of that.
Yeah.
Really.
I want to pick up a little bit on tutoring, so teaching healing and obviously you're a tutor. Would you explain to us how someone becomes a tutor to teach healing? What is the pathway to qualify for that?
Okay, so you have to be a full member of the Healing Trust to become a tutor. You have to be a full member for at least 2 years. So you've done your panel, you've done your training, you've done your panel. It's then 2 years practice before you're allowed to become a trainee tutor. And then the trainee tutors have 2 years minimum to observe other people doing it. So observing another tutor working. And then what the tutor who is, as it were, teaching, they're not really teaching, the trainee tutor, they're observing. But what they do is to give them a subject or a topic where they will say, okay, I want you to teach this section of the training. We're doing this today. I want you to do that slot. And you've got an hour and a half to teach whatever it happens to be. So they have to do that. And I've had tutors who have learnt with me and are now tutors. Yes, that's basically how it works. They then have to go to a panel to be accepted to start with, to become a tutor, become a trainee tutor. They have to do a panel. Then after the 2 years and when they've had all the experience that they need to have, they will need to go to another panel where they basically demonstrate what they are going to be doing. So what they also need to have as a qualification is a teaching certificate of some sort.
Yeah.
So, but you can get those actually very easily now. There's something called the Advanced Education, Advanced Education Training. I can't remember what it stands for. Anyway, I did mine in 3 days.
Oh, wow.
I'd been teaching for years, but I did it 3 full days learning the basics of teaching.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the future now. In your view, what is the future for spiritual healing?
Spiritual healing has been going on for millennia. It is not millions of millennia, no doubt. I've no idea how long that has been going on, but seriously, millennia. And we are not about to stop now. So it's one of those things that's completely natural. We all can do it if we wish, and it's a God-given thing. It just is. We can do it. And I know when I have my little nephews, who aren't so little anymore, when I had 2 little nephews who are now 28 and 30, but at the time when they were running around and playing and grazing their knees and whatever, and the little one, who's now 28, would come running up to me and say, Auntie Jen, I've hurt my knee. And I'd say, right, healing. And I'd put him on my knee and I'd put my hand on his knee and go, healing. And he'd go, okay, better now. And then he'd go,
Love it.
I don't know if I remember that, but I certainly did that with my nephew. But both of them, those 2. And the other 2, my brother has 2 boys and my sister has a boy and a girl. And they're all tuned into all this stuff.
It's bringing the fun to healing. I love it. What's your vision for the Healing Trust?
That's a good question. There's so much has been going on. There's a massive amount going on right now. And it's all good. It's all good ultimately. There's lots of niggles going on. I'm not going to bore you with those. But there are niggly bits going on. And generally speaking, we have to work more and more with the medical people and the scientists. There is no question that we have to do more of that.
I could not agree more.
So the more it becomes mainstream, the better. The more that it becomes more than an alternative therapy, even though it is alternative, obviously, complementary.
Complementary, yeah.
Yeah, that's what yes, not alternative, complementary. But the more mainstream it becomes, the easier it is for people to accept it and not go through all those, for some people, struggles of, well, is it really worth my while doing it? And is it going to help? If we all had healing all the time, it would be a blissful world.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end of our little chat. To conclude, would you share with us your most inspiring quote?
Yes, I looked that up because I saw it in the questions. I will find it now. It's a Harry Edwards quote.
Oh, wonderful.
Funny that. I use it a lot. This one is in my notes for part 1 of the training of the Healing Trust. I always read this out to my students. No one can learn to heal. What we can do, and this is of primary importance, is to train ourselves to attune to spirit. The healing power comes through us, and it is not of us.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Harry, that's a guide to spirit healing. That's from his book.
Well, what a wonderful way to end the interview. Jennifer, thank you so much for agreeing to be in our hot seat for this month's In Conversation with Healers. It's been an absolute pleasure interviewing you this evening. And I've loved your answers, and I've learned so much just listening to you. We'll say good night to our viewers on Facebook. Thank you so much for joining, and I'd like to thank everybody for their patience while I muddled my way through all the technical hitches. But I got into a Zoom room in the end, and it was the one that you lot were all in as well, so a plan came together. But thank you so much, and we'll say good night to Facebook now. And we can go into coffee and chat.